Officer finds a little boy selling his dog for $12 on a snowy night. The truth brings him to tears. Snow fell in heavy sheets, muting the small town of Maplebrook beneath a blanket of white. The streets were nearly deserted. Only the distant hum of a snowplow broke the silence. Officer Ethan Walker drove his patrol car slowly down Ashford Street, windshield wipers fighting against the storm. At 36, he had grown used to long winter nights on duty, but something in his chest ached tonight, the kind of ache that came when memory crept in uninvited. He thought of his father, gone since Ethan was just 10, and how Christmas had never felt whole after that. As the headlight swept over a crumbling brick wall, Ethan saw movement. At first, he thought it was a stray dog hunched against the storm. But then the beams revealed a boy, small, no older than 11, his coat threadbare, his arms wrapped tightly around a German shepherd. The boy's lips trembled from cold, and next to him leaned a piece of cardboard scrawled with shaky letters, "For sale, dog, $12. Ethan braked hard, his breath catching. He stepped out into the biting wind, boots crunching on snow, the icy air stinging his face. The boy looked up, wide-eyed, as if expecting trouble instead of help. The dog growled low, placing itself between the child and the officer. "What are you doing out here?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than he expected. The boy swallowed hard, his eyes red-rimmed. I have to sell him. His name's Shadow. $12 is enough to get me to New York." His words broke, but he forced them out. "I need to find my dad." The raw desperation in his voice pierced Ethan deeper than the cold ever could. In an instant, Ethan saw himself in that boy, the loneliness, the hunger for a father's presence. He crouched low, meeting the boy's gaze, while the snow swirled around them like a curtain, closing on the world. Behind the boy's defiance was fear, and behind his fear was a hope so fragile it could shatter with a single wrong word. Ethan knew he was standing at the edge of something that would change them both forever. What secret had driven a child into the storm with nothing but a dog and a dream, and what would it cost to uncover the truth? Ethan Walker had worn the Maplebrook police badge for over a decade, but it never felt like armor. Most nights, it was simply a reminder of duty, of long hours in the cold, of faces blurred together in routine calls. Tonight was different. Tonight, the badge pressed against his chest as if urging him to act, not just as an officer, but as a man who remembered what it was to be a lonely boy with no one to lean on. He studied the child before him, small frame, cheeks raw with frost, sneakers soaked through from the snow. A boy who should have been home by a fire, not crouched under a brick wall with a handwritten sign. The German shepherd beside him was lean but strong, its coat dusted white with flakes. The dog's eyes never left Ethan, amber and sharp, guarding its boy like a sentinel. "My name's Ethan," the officer said carefully, lowering himself into a crouch. "What's yours?" "Noah Bennett." The boy's voice was quiet but steady, shaped by determination beyond his years. His arms tightened around the dog's neck. "This is Shadow. He's all I've got." Ethan felt the words strike deep. All I've got. He remembered saying nearly the same thing after his father's funeral. Clutching the folded flag, his mother too lost in her grief to meet his eyes. He had learned early that sometimes children carry burdens heavier than adults ever should. "Why sell him?" Ethan asked softly. Noah bit his lip until it trembled. From the pocket of his thin jacket, he pulled out a creased envelope. "Because my dad's in New York, I need a bus ticket. $12 is enough." His fingers smoothed the paper with reverence as though it were sacred. Ethan took it gently, unfolding the brittle stationery. A letter, dated 7 years earlier. The handwriting was hurried, but the words were clear. "I'll be home before Christmas, I promise." Signed, David Bennett. The ache in Ethan's chest deepened. The boy's hope had been built on a promise as fragile as snowflakes. "And your mom?" Ethan asked carefully. "She died." Noah's voice cracked, but he pushed the words through. 3 years ago. She always told me Dad would come back. When she got sick, she made me promise to take care of Shadow. Now it's my turn to find him. I can't wait anymore." The rawness of it left Ethan silent for a moment. The wind whistled through the alley, tugging at the cardboard sign, rattling the metal lid of a nearby trash can. Shadow pressed closer to Noah, eyes narrowing at Ethan as though daring him to try to separate them. Ethan recognized the look. Loyalty. The same look his father's old dog had given him when he was Noah's age, long before cancer claimed the man who had been his anchor. The memory of that loss still gnawed at him. Now staring at Noah, he felt as if he were staring into a mirror of his younger self, abandoned by circumstance, clinging to the last thread of family. "Come with me," Ethan said at last, his voice low, steady. "It's too cold out here. You and Shadow need warmth, food. We'll figure this out together." Noah hesitated, suspicion flickering in his dark eyes. "You won't take him away from me?" Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, Shadow stays with you, I promise." That single word, promise, made Noah's eyes glisten. Slowly, he nodded, and together they walked toward Ethan's patrol car. The boy's shoulders hunched, as though still waiting for the world to snatch away his fragile hope. Shadow jumped into the back seat, curling protectively against Noah, his amber gaze flicking between the boy and the officer. Back at the police station, warmth enveloped them. Noah's fingers thawed painfully as he clutched a styrofoam cup of hot cocoa. Ethan sat across the table, scrolling through databases on his computer, searching for any record of David Bennett. The boy watched him silently, one hand buried in Shadow's thick fur, drawing strength from the steady thump of the dog's heartbeat. Ethan glanced at Noah and saw more than a boy. He saw a child shouldering loss, determined not to let the thread to his father snap. It stirred something long buried in Ethan, the part of him that remembered waiting by the window as snow fell, hoping a father's silhouette might appear, knowing deep down it never would. For the first time in years, Ethan felt that maybe fate hadn't put him on Ashford Street by chance. Maybe two broken paths had been meant to cross on a night when the snow threatened to erase them both. The police station had grown quiet as the storm outside deepened. The hum of the heater filled the silence, wrapping the small room in warmth. Noah sat curled in his chair, both hands buried in Shadow's thick fur, his eyelids heavy from exhaustion, but his posture still tense, as though afraid that if he relaxed, everything might be taken away. Ethan watched from across the desk, the glow of the computer screen painting his tired features. He had pulled every record he could find: birth certificates, work logs, employment history, but David Bennett's trail had ended abruptly 7 years earlier. The last entry listed him as a construction worker in the Bronx. After that, nothing. A man who had disappeared as suddenly as he had once promised to return. Closing the file, Ethan leaned forward, his voice quiet. "Noah, when was the last time you heard from your dad?" The boy shook his head. "Never. Just that letter. Mom kept it under her pillow until she was gone." His throat tightened, the words nearly breaking. Shadow whined softly, pressing his head into Noah's lap as if absorbing the boy's sorrow. Ethan's gaze softened. He knew the ache of unanswered questions, the way silence from a parent could echo louder than any sound. Slowly, he reached into the bottom drawer of his desk, pulling out 2 granola bars. He slid one across the table. "Eat. You'll think clearer on a full stomach." Noah hesitated, then tore the wrapper open. Shadow immediately perked up, nose twitching. Noah broke off a piece and offered it to him. The dog took it gently, eyes never leaving his boy's face. Ethan couldn't help but smile at the gesture. Loyalty ran both ways. Even in hunger, Noah thought first of Shadow. As the boy ate, Ethan rose and poured a second cup of cocoa. This time, instead of placing it on the table, he set it directly in front of Noah, meeting his eyes. "You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." The boy stared at him for a long moment, weighing the promise. Finally, his shoulders sagged and a tear slipped down his cheek. He reached out, tentative, and placed his small hand over Ethan's. It was a fragile gesture, a bridge built in silence. Ethan felt the weight of it, trust offered by a child who had every reason not to give it. Shadow shifted, resting his muzzle across both of their hands, sealing the bond in a way no words could. Hours later, Noah dozed on the couch in the station lounge, Shadow curled tightly against him. Ethan draped a blanket over them and stood back, watching the boy breathe steadily for the first time that night. Something stirred in him. Protectiveness, yes, but also recognition. The boy's presence filled the empty corners of the station just as it had filled something hollow inside Ethan. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing tracks and covering the scars of the town. Inside, for the first time in years, Ethan felt the faint warmth of connection. He knew the road ahead would be hard. Answers about David Bennett would not come easily. But he also knew this much. The boy and his dog were no longer fighting the storm alone. The following morning, the storm had eased, leaving Maplebrook blanketed in white. The sun broke weakly through the clouds, glinting off frozen rooftops and turning the snow into a sea of light. Inside the small lounge of the police station, Noah stirred awake beneath a heavy blanket. Shadow was pressed close against him, his fur warm and his steady breathing like a shield between the boy and the world. Ethan sat nearby, coffee cooling in his hands, watching as the boy blinked the sleep from his eyes. For a moment, Noah looked disoriented, as if forgetting where he was, but then his gaze landed on Shadow, and the tension in his face softened. "You're safe," Ethan said quietly. Noah nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Shadow kept me warm." Ethan smiled faintly. "Looks like he always has." The boy hesitated, then began to speak. His voice was soft, almost as though he were afraid of breaking the fragile quiet. "Mom used to say Shadow was my brother. She found him as a puppy, tied to a fence behind a grocery store. Nobody wanted him because he had a scar on his ear. But Mom said scars mean you survived. She told me he was meant to be ours." Ethan's gaze shifted to the dog, noting the notch in the shepherd's left ear, the faint line of old injury. Shadow raised his head at the sound of his name, amber eyes alert, before settling back against Noah's side. Mom named him Shadow because he followed me everywhere, Noah continued, a small smile flickering and vanishing just as quickly. Even when I was scared at night, he'd sleep by my bed. When she got sick, he never left her side. He knew. Ethan's throat tightened. What happened to her? Noah's face grew still. She worked at the diner. One day she fainted. The doctor said it was cancer. She tried to keep working, but she couldn't. His voice trembled, and he buried his face in Shadow's fur. She always told me my dad would come back, that he'd walk through the door and everything would be okay, but he never did. And then she was gone. The boy's words cracked open something deep in Ethan. He remembered standing in his own childhood home, a folded flag clutched to his chest, watching his mother crumble under grief. His father, a firefighter, had died in a blaze when Ethan was just 10. He had never said goodbye. He had waited at the window for weeks afterward, convinced his father would appear, soot-streaked but alive. The silence that followed had hollowed him. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "I know what it feels like to wait for someone who never comes back," he said. "My dad died when I was your age. I kept hoping, even after the funeral. Sometimes hope is the hardest thing to let go of." Noah lifted his head, eyes wet. "Did you stop hoping?" Ethan paused. "Not really. I think I just learned to carry it differently." The boy studied him, as if searching for proof that survival was possible. Finally, he looked down at Shadow again, stroking the dog's fur with trembling fingers. Shadow's story, Noah explained, was tied to his mother's final days. When she grew too weak to leave bed, Noah would read to her from old magazines. Shadow lay at her feet, sensing the shifting weight of sorrow in the house. On her last night, she had pulled Noah close and whispered, "Take care of him. He will take care of you." It had been both command and comfort. Ethan felt his chest tighten at the image of a boy keeping vigil at his mother's side, armed with nothing but a dog and a promise. He wanted to reach across the gulf of years and shield that child from everything that followed. For a long while, silence filled the room, heavy but not empty. Outside, snow slipped from the eaves in heavy clumps, crashing softly into the drifts below. Finally, Ethan stood. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led Noah and Shadow to his patrol car, driving out past the edge of town. The road wound through bare trees, their branches heavy with ice. They stopped at a small cemetery on a hill. Ethan guided them to a headstone etched with the name Samuel Walker. "My father," Ethan said simply. "This is where I come when I need to remember that he was real, that he mattered." He glanced at Noah. "Your father mattered too. Whether he comes back or not, you matter. And Shadow, he's proof your mom knew you would need someone who would never leave." Noah stood quietly, the wind tugging at his too thin coat. He reached down to rest his hand on Shadow's head. I understand." Ethan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. For the first time since they met, Noah didn't flinch at the contact. He leaned into it just slightly, and in that small gesture, Ethan felt a bond form. Two lives scarred by loss, drawn together not by blood, but by understanding. As they drove back toward town, Noah fell asleep in the passenger seat, Shadow's head in his lap. Ethan glanced at them and felt the stirrings of something he hadn't known in years: purpose. The boy wasn't his responsibility by law, but Ethan knew deep in his bones that he could not let him go. For both of them, the past had been marked by absence and grief. But now, perhaps, the road ahead held the possibility of healing, not alone, but together. The train into New York rattled through snow-streaked valleys, carrying three unlikely companions: a weary officer, a determined boy, and a loyal dog. Noah pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the blur of lights and towns, clutching Shadow's leash as if it were a lifeline. Ethan sat opposite, arms folded, eyes alert to every sound. The city was no stranger to him, but bringing a child into its shadows felt like carrying a candle into a storm. By the time they stepped onto the platform at Penn Station, night had swallowed Manhattan. The streets hissed with slush under tires, neon bleeding into puddles. To Noah, it was overwhelming, a labyrinth of noise and strangers. Shadow stayed pressed against his side, shoulders rigid, head constantly turning. Ethan kept them close, guiding with a steady hand. Their first stop was Haven House, the crumbling boarding house once listed on David Bennett's work records. Lorraine Pike, the landlady, remembered him well, a quiet man with tired eyes who carried a photograph of his wife and son everywhere. "He went to work one morning and never came back," she said, her face soft with pity. "There was an accident in the Bronx. Scaffold collapse. After that, nothing." Her words weighed on Noah like lead, but he clung to the small piece of proof she offered, a battered lighter with DB etched into the metal left behind in David's room. He held it as though it might spark answers. Leaving the boarding house, they turned down a dim street toward the subway. That was when trouble found them. Three men stepped from the shadows, rough coats and colder eyes. One held a switchblade loosely at his side. "Nice dog," he sneered. "Bet he's worth more than $12. Ethan moved in front of Noah instantly, hand on his holster. "Walk away." But the men spread out, cutting off the street. The leader reached for Shadow's leash. In a flash, the shepherd lunged, teeth snapping, a growl erupting from deep in his chest. The man stumbled back with a curse, knife clattering against brick. Startled by the ferocity, the others hesitated, then melted into the alley, muttering threats. Ethan exhaled, heart hammering. "You okay?" he asked, checking Noah. The boy nodded shakily, hugging Shadow, whispering into his fur. "Good boy, you saved me." It wasn't the last time Shadow's instincts would keep them alive. Later that night, in the echoing tunnels of the subway, the danger grew sharper. Crowds surged as a train screeched into the station. Noah, clutching the lighter, was jostled toward the edge. His foot slipped, and for a heartbeat, his body tilted over the tracks, headlights bearing down. Ethan's shout was lost in the roar. Shadow reacted first. His jaws clamped onto the fabric of Noah's hoodie, yanking with all his strength. The boy toppled backward into Ethan's arms just as the train thundered past, wind whipping their clothes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Noah's chest heaved, eyes wide with shock. Ethan held him close, whispering, "I've got you. You're safe." Shadow stood guard, hackles raised, eyes blazing as though daring the city itself to try again. When the train noise faded, silence pressed heavy between them. Noah buried his face against Ethan's coat, clutching both the lighter and Shadow's fur. For the first time, the boy's tears weren't only for loss, they were for the terror of almost losing the future he hadn't yet found. Ethan met Shadow's gaze over the boy's head. The dog's amber eyes were fierce, unyielding, but also steady with trust. It struck Ethan then, this wasn't just about finding answers. It was about survival, about proving to Noah that he wasn't alone in the fight anymore. That night, in a small diner near the Bronx, Ethan spread out public records and newspaper clippings. The pieces began to fit together. A construction accident 7 years ago, names of the dead, and there it was, David Bennett, a man who had tried to make it home but never could. Ethan closed his eyes, grief pressing against his ribs. He thought of how to tell Noah. A boy's fragile hope could be broken in a sentence, but lies would be crueler still. Outside, the wind keened through the streets. Inside, Shadow rested his head on Noah's lap, as if sensing the storm that was about to break, not from weather, but from truth. The diner was nearly empty. Only the rattle of a ceiling fan and the hiss of the coffee machine breaking the silence. Ethan sat across from Noah in the corner booth, the folder of documents heavy on the table between them. Shadow lay underfoot, his head resting on the boy's sneakers, amber eyes flicking between master and officer. Ethan had spent hours turning the words over in his mind, searching for a gentler way to break what could not be softened. In the end, truth was truth, and it demanded to be spoken. "Noah," he began, voice low, steady, "I found records about your father." The boy leaned forward, eyes wide, hope raw and fragile. "Where is he? Can we see him?" Ethan drew a long breath. There was an accident, a scaffolding collapse at a construction site in the Bronx. Your father, David Bennett, was there. He didn't survive. The words landed like stones dropped into a still pond, the ripples spreading fast. Noah's lips parted, but no sound came. He stared at Ethan, eyes round with disbelief, then shook his head fiercely. "No, that's not true. He promised. He said he'd come home before Christmas. He promised." Ethan's chest tightened. He reached across the table, but Noah jerked back, clutching Shadow's fur as tears welled in his eyes. "You're lying. He wouldn't just leave me like that." Ethan's throat burned. He leaned forward, his voice breaking. "Noah, listen to me. Your father didn't abandon you. He was trying to come home. He carried a picture of you and your mom with him every day. He wanted you to know he loved you right up until the end." The boy's small frame trembled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Shadow pressed closer, licking at his hand, whining softly. Finally, Noah collapsed against the dog, burying his face in the shepherd's neck. His sobs tore through the diner, raw and unrestrained. Ethan slid out of his seat, kneeling beside them. He placed a steady hand on the boy's back, feeling the weight of grief that was far too heavy for 11-year-old shoulders. "I know what it's like," he whispered. "I lost my dad, too. I waited by the window every night, hoping he'd come back. But he didn't, and I thought I was alone forever. But you're not alone, Noah. Not anymore." The boy turned slowly, eyes swollen with tears. "Then what do I have left?" His voice cracked into a whisper. "You have Shadow," Ethan said firmly, glancing at the dog who had refused to let the boy slip into danger. "You have me, and if you'll let us, we'll be family. We'll carry this together." For a moment, silence stretched. Then Noah flung himself into Ethan's arms, clutching him tightly. Ethan held him, strong and steady, tears slipping down his own face as he pressed his cheek against the boy's hair. Shadow wedged between them, tail thumping once, his warm body anchoring them all in that fragile moment. It wasn't the reunion Noah had dreamed of. It was something harder, crueler, yet strangely redemptive. For in the breaking of his hope, a new bond had formed, one built not on promises unkept, but on the unyielding truth of loyalty and love in the present. As the city roared outside, the little booth in the diner became a shelter. A boy learning to grieve, a man learning to heal, and a dog who had saved them both more than once. Ethan whispered again, steady as a vow, "You're not alone, not ever again." And for the first time since his mother's death, Noah believed it. Winter loosened its grip on Maplebrook slowly, but in Ethan's small house on the edge of town, warmth returned faster than the season could provide. Days fell into gentle rhythms, Shadow pacing the porch like a guardian, Noah's laughter echoing through rooms once silent, and Ethan rediscovering what it felt like to come home to more than memories. The court hearing was brief, but momentous. With the help of family services, Ethan signed the papers that made Noah his son in name as well as in heart. The judge smiled as she tapped the gavel, declaring, "Noah Bennett Walker." The boy clutched Shadow's leash with one hand and Ethan's sleeve with the other, and for the first time in years, he didn't look like he was waiting for someone to leave. He looked like he belonged. That December, Ethan brought home a modest Christmas tree. Together, they decorated it with paper ornaments and strings of popcorn. Noah placed his father's old lighter, still etched with the initials DB, on a branch near the top. "So he can see us," Noah said softly. Ethan's throat tightened, but he only nodded, placing a steady arm around the boy's shoulders. Shadow sprawled by the fire as if he had always been there, eyes half closed but ears pricked, watching over his family. Every so often, Noah would read aloud from his comic books, his voice animated, and Shadow would lift his head as though listening to every word. Ethan would sit back, coffee in hand, letting the warmth seep deeper than the fire ever could. On Christmas Eve, snow began to fall again, dusting the porch and painting the night silver. Ethan stepped outside, Noah at his side, Shadow pressed close. The town was quiet, the air filled with that hushed magic that only comes when the world is blanketed in white. Noah slipped his hand into Ethan's, small but certain. "Do you think Dad knows?" the boy asked. Ethan looked at him, then at the sky where flakes tumbled endlessly. "I think he does, and I think he'd be proud." Noah leaned against him, Shadow's tail brushing gently against their legs. In that moment, Ethan realized the emptiness he had carried since his own childhood had begun to mend. Grief would always leave its mark, but love had returned to fill the cracks. As the snow drifted down, 3 figures stood together on the porch. A boy who had almost been lost to loneliness, a man who thought his heart could never heal, and a dog who had refused to let either of them fall. Not all heroes wear badges or carry medals. Some walk on 4 legs, leave paw prints in the snow, and guard the fragile light of hope until it burns strong again. And on that snowy night in Maplebrook, hope was no longer fragile. It was home